God of War Valhalla is a DLC expansion to God of War Ragnarok that sees Kratos and Mimir after the events of Ragnarok traveling to Valhalla, having received a mysterious invitation. Throughout Valhalla, Kratos as well as the audience is confronted with Kratos' past through a series of trials and encounters with illusions. This DLC, more than the previous two Norse God of War games, sees Kratos directly confronted with all of the horrible things he's done and how it affects him in the present. It is throughout the DLC that we find out Kratos has been asked by Freya to take Tyr's place as a god in the Norse pantheon, and that Tyr is actually the one who sent Kratos the invitation in order to have him accept his past and take up his new role as the Norse god of war. It is at the end of this DLC that we see Kratos both literally and figuratively face his past. I'm going to let this whole scene play out as is, and then discuss the writer's choices, why this scene is so impactful and powerful, and what it reveals about Kratos as a character.
What can I say to you? I remember how it felt to take that throne. All that it meant. And all that it did not. A god of war. A god of pain. Of suffering. Of destruction. And the one said I chase redemption that I know I can never deserve. What does that make me? God of fools. A god of... hope. When all else is lost. You lost everything. And everyone. You became... There is no forgiving you. You chose! I chose. But now... should I, this same man, should I sit, take, proclaim, lead, place myself in service? In service? Should I lose everything and everyone? There's to be enough left inside so that I do not become you. I do not know. But I have hope. You are cruel and arrogant and selfish. But you are more than that. You have always been more than what others saw. You are more than that.
I missed everything. Did you find what you needed? Glad to hear it, brother. We're done here then, so, what now?
Now, I believe I would like to sit here for a while.
In this scene, we see that Kratos is given the opportunity to come face to face with his younger self and directly confront his past. It's important to note that Kratos is alone here. This is only a manifestation or a Valhalla-induced illusion of his younger self. Prior to this scene, a lot of his emotions, introspection, and deeper thought was kept to himself, kept inside. Not even the player could entirely be sure 100% what Kratos was thinking or how he felt at any given moment. But in this scene, there is no one that Kratos has to hide his true feelings or thoughts from. And while there are two people present in this scene, both of them are Kratos. Kratos actually acknowledges this when he says that he remembers how it felt to take the throne. His title was the God of War, but all it really meant at the time was pain, suffering, and destruction. He was the God of War, but he didn't earn the role, instead taking it by force and becoming a monster. Kratos then goes on to reflect on what the Norns told him in Ragnarok, with it clearly having affected him far more than he outwardly expressed in that game. If he is chasing some kind of redemption but not allowing himself to believe that he deserves it, then what does that make him? Kratos feels in this moment that he has no direction. For so long, he's been defined by what others think of him, by vengeance, by rage, by loss. But who is he? If he's not the God of War that he once was, then what does that make him now? It's in this moment of uncertainty that Kratos looks down at a statue of Pandora and finds the word hope, remembering something that she once said to him. Kratos begins to understand that he can take on a new role, that when everything else is taken away, he can still have hope. When he is confronted with the things he's done and the person that he used to be, he can still have hope that he will be better and make better choices. He has constantly fought with and rejected the person that he once was, because to accept this version of himself would mean that he accepts that there is no way forward. He would have to accept that there is no possible redemption and that he is defined by the violent monster he once was. But there is another way. Through hope, Kratos cannot forgive or erase the past, but instead acknowledge it and use it to inform his actions in the present. There is no forgiving the atrocities Kratos committed, but he is not bound to remain the person who committed them either. He has changed. He is capable of change, and he is not the same person that he once was. Kratos is beginning to understand his past actions rather than running away from them. I particularly love what the writers did with the line, "You lost everything, and everyone, and you became," with Kratos trailing off, not finishing the thought fully. There are a couple ways to view this line. One of them is that the writers chose to have Kratos leave a sort of fill-in-the-blank sentence. This allows the players' minds to fill in that blank themselves. It's not only Kratos confronting himself here, but a display to the audience just how different Kratos has become. We're likely to fill in this gap with something like evil, a monster, a villain, a destroyer, and so on and so on. We have seen Kratos' story unfold from the very beginning, so we know very well the person that he used to be. What they chose to do instead was far more impactful than having Kratos use some derogatory title to describe himself. The audience, along with Kratos, are confronted with the fact that the same older Kratos that we see on screen now was the same monster in the Greek God of War games, despite a great deal of character growth. Another way to interpret this is that Kratos doesn't finish this sentence because he doesn't really know how to describe his past self at this moment. He is seeing all of these past actions in a completely new light and does not wish to demean his past self because he is done rejecting and fighting against the person that he used to be. He begins this line antagonistic and angry, but with newfound insight and wisdom, he composes himself and starts to frame it as awful choices that were made, rather than calling himself an awful person. This reinforces the idea and the intent of the story the writers are telling here. Kratos is not a monster. He just made monstrous choices, and while they can't be forgiven, they can be acknowledged. Kratos shouts here that you chose, and then repeats himself, but softer and more calmly. I chose. I think this is representative of both eras of Kratos, with the angry, rage-filled exclamation being the Greek games' Kratos, and the calmer, more stoic declaration being the Norse games' Kratos. This whole time, Kratos has been shouting at and scolding the younger one on the throne with disdain and anger. He's been treating this illusion as if it was some other person that he's belittling for doing the wrong thing and making the wrong choices. But with this line, he fully confronts and acknowledges the fact that he is speaking to himself. He's not confronting some other person. This very much is Kratos just as much as the older one is. It is that prompts Kratos to ask the question of whether he is able to even move forward, knowing that he was once this villainous and monstrous person. He asks, what now? If I am the same man, this same monster I see before me, then should I even be allowed to take a throne? Should I even be allowed to proclaim myself a leader? A god? The delivery of the last part of this line is very important to note and incredibly well done by Christopher Judge here. Place myself in service is said by Kratos with such a significant amount of disgust and anger in comparison to the rest of this line. If you're familiar with the character of Kratos, it should be pretty evident why of all the questions he posed to himself, placing himself in service of others is the one that unsettles and disturbs him the most. Kratos pledging himself to Ares in the original God of War game was one of the worst and negatively impactful choices Kratos ever made. He would have died in that moment had he not, but because of this, he went on to commit terrible atrocities both in Ares' name and his own. He killed his original family in a blind rage, destroyed cities, ruined lives, and would eventually brutally slaughter the entire Greek pantheon of gods and plunge Greece into ruins. Kratos was put on the path to do so by placing himself in service of beings like Ares or Athena, so the sheer disgust Kratos has for the idea of once again placing himself in service during this monologue is completely understandable. Choosing to make this one of the things that would make Kratos hesitant to accept the title of God of War once again was a brilliant choice by the writers, because of course, this would be something that would carry heavy weight on Kratos' mind when given a proposal like this. Kratos is clearly reflecting on the last time he pledged his service to someone and how horribly that turned out for him and everyone around him. This is further evidenced when Kratos repeats quietly, in service, and then goes on to pose the question. If the events were to play out the same way they did when he pledged himself to Ares, and he were to lose everything and everyone that he cares about, has he changed enough so that he does not follow the same vengeful, destructive, and villainous path that his younger self did? Kratos is not certain that he would react the same way were he to experience similar tragedies. But through his development in the Norse games and his introspection in Valhalla, Kratos is willing to have hope that he can be better. He will no longer live in fear of becoming who he once was, but instead, he is making the conscious choice to have hope that he has changed and that he is better. Hope that he will make better choices and be better than he was in the past. Kratos then goes on to admit to himself that his past actions were selfish, cruel, and arrogant, but that there's more to him than that. There is more to him than what people tell him he is or the horrible choices he's made. His choices were self-serving and evil, and he was so arrogant that he often did not care if what he was doing was wrong. But in this moment, Kratos rejects what so many people throughout all of the God of War games have told him he is. Someone who is incapable of change. A monster. An animal. Kratos asserts that he is more than that. He is not evil and he never was. He made despicable and unforgivable choices that have caused irreparable damage to himself and the people around him. But that does not define him. He is more than that. He has always been more than that. More than what others saw or what they would constantly tell him he is. Once he comes to that conclusion and accepts it, he repeats himself, but not speaking to the illusion of past Kratos. He is asserting it for his own sake, for his present-day self. It's at this moment that the camera pans and the younger Kratos is completely gone, with just an empty throne remaining. This is very much symbolic of the fact that Kratos is, or at the very least deemed by Valhalla to be, ready to take the throne and his new role as the Norse god of war. But he will no longer be burdened or haunted by the god that he used to be. Kratos then very slowly and silently walks up to the empty throne and sits. The music throughout this DLC is incredible, but the score really shines here. It swells and goes from somber to triumphant as Kratos slowly lowers himself onto the throne to convey just how big of a feat this is for Kratos. In this moment, Kratos seems to be literally holding his breath and only lets it go once he is sat on the throne and is settled. He acts very similar here to how one would behave if a gun was pointed at their head and then suddenly lowered. To him, this is far less simple than the act of sitting in a chair. It means he's accepting to once again be a god of war and everything that that means. The responsibility, the power, the weight of what that role has meant in his life, the destruction, the pain, the sorrow that it caused. It's a quiet declaration that he's no longer going to run from his past, and he will no longer be defined by it. He will accept it. After some obvious visual discomfort, he steadies himself, remaining confident in choosing hope that he can be better instead of fear of becoming who he once was. There is a sort of symmetry here with this scene and the rest of the DLC. Having Kratos so hesitant to take the throne and his role as the new god of war at the beginning of both the DLC and this scene. Both the DLC and this scene started with refusal and both ended with acceptance. I want to applaud the writers of this DLC and this scene in particular for exercising quite a lot of restraint. The easy route would have been to make this a boss fight. Have Kratos fight the younger version of himself. I believe the scene was intentionally set up to defy those audience expectations. From a metatextual standpoint, the cutscene opens as if there is going to be this huge brawl or boss fight with Kratos' younger self, but instead, it opts to have Kratos talk to and confront this embodiment of his past actions through dialogue alone. From a writing standpoint, it makes the most sense that Kratos would behave this way. The entire DLC is about Kratos not continuing to fight who he once was, but to understand, confront, and move on to be better. By having him not physically fight his younger self, the writers are signifying to the audience that this Kratos is far different than the one he used to be. When literally faced with his past self, he chooses to stop fighting and talks it through. Valhalla chooses silence and reflection over spectacle, and it's no more evident than in this scene. It would not be nearly as powerful without the writers, composers, and especially Christopher Judge's incredible performance. This is a triumph for both the character of Kratos and the audience that is engaged with his story that began all the way back in 2005. Kratos walks out of Valhalla a new god, fueled not by vengeance or rage, but by hope.